I am Eric Chandler, 40 years old, and my life changed in an unforgettable moment during my father's retirement party on a frigid night in Chicago. The opulent banquet room at the Peninsula Hotel shimmered with chandelier light, the clinking of crystal glasses mingling with refined laughter. My father, Harold Chandler, CEO of Nexora Investments, stood at the podium, his bespoke suit perfectly tailored, his sharp gaze sweeping over the crowd of more than 100 guests, powerful figures in the financial world. He raised his glass, his voice resonant with pride as he spoke of the empire he had devoted nearly his entire life to, and of his two outstanding sons, Michael and David. Then his eyes locked onto me, standing quietly in the corner of the room, and his lips curled into a sardonic smile. "Eric, my youngest son," he said, his voice low but cutting like a knife, "chose the path of a lowly soldier, poor and meaningless. Perhaps he should leave before he ruins our mood." The room erupted in laughter. I felt dozens of eyes boring into me like needles piercing through my skin. Blood rushed to my face, my heart pounding in my chest. Michael, my older brother, smirked from the head table. David, my second brother, looked away, but I knew he was chuckling to himself. I stood there in my simple civilian suit, the small West Point pin on my lapel the only reminder of who I truly was. I had come here with a naive hope for reconciliation, hope for recognition. But now, humiliation burned in my chest like a raging fire. I clenched my fists, preparing to walk out of the room, leaving behind the whispers and pitying glances. But then a deep and authoritative voice rang out from behind. "You're Major General Chandler, aren't you?" I turned around. It was Robert Grayson, chairman of Nexora Investments, my father's boss. Robert was a tall man with silver hair and piercing eyes staring directly at me. The room seemed to hold its breath. My father, Michael, David. They all froze, mouths agape. I took a deep breath and nodded slightly. "Yes, sir. That's me." Grayson stepped forward, placed a hand on my shoulder, and gave me a warm smile. "You're the one who saved our company during the Sentinel fire operation. A strategic genius, a pride of this nation." In that moment, the room seemed to explode in awkward silence. My father, who had always seen me as a failure, stood there, his face pale as if he'd been slapped. Michael and David stared at me, their eyes filled with a mix of confusion and irritation. I said nothing more. I simply turned and walked out of the room with Grayson, leaving behind the gazes and murmurs. That night I realized one thing. My worth didn't lie in what my family thought of me, but in the path I had chosen and the people who truly saw me. But before I continue this story, let me take you back to the past, where it all began, where the first wounds were carved into my heart, and where I learned to rise above the mockery of my own family. I grew up in a magnificent house in Chicago's Gold Coast, where mahogany-paneled walls and marble floors told the story of the Chandler family's wealth. My father, Harold, was a towering man, always dressed in expensive suits and carrying the rich scent of Creed cologne. As the CEO of Nexora Investments, a massive financial conglomerate, he measured success by one standard alone: money. My mother, Margaret, was a gentlewoman who loved books and history. But a heart attack took her from me forever when I was just 17. My two older brothers, Michael and David, 5 and 3 years older than me, respectively, were the perfect embodiment of my father's ideals, ambitious, sharp, and always eager to please him. And me? I was the odd one out. From a young age, I was captivated by books about war, stories of generals and military strategy. While Michael and David played mock stock trading on my father's computer, I sat in a corner of the room reading about the Battle of Gettysburg or the Normandy campaign. I dreamed of attending West Point, becoming a soldier, a strategist. But in my family's eyes, my passion was a joke. I remember one summer afternoon when I was 12, bursting into the living room with a gold medal from a school military strategy simulation competition. I had spent months preparing, crafting detailed plans, and won against older competitors. "Dad, I won the gold medal," I exclaimed, holding up the gleaming medal. But my father barely glanced at it before turning to Michael, who was pitching a new business idea. "Well done, Michael," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. Then his eyes flicked back to me. "And Eric, don't waste my time with childish games." The medal in my hand suddenly felt heavy, a reminder that I would never be good enough. Michael and David weren't any kinder. Michael, with his arrogant smile, mocked me when he caught me reading Sun Tzu's The Art of War. "Soldiers just carry guns and die broke," he said, making David burst into laughter. David, always more cunning, called me a delusional dreamer. Once at a Christmas party at our house when I was 15, my father stood to give a toast, praising Michael for winning a business scholarship and David for his debate team achievements. Then he looked at me, his eyes cold. "Eric, maybe one day you'll figure out how to stop disappointing me." The entire table roared with laughter except for my mother. She squeezed my hand under the table, but her eyes were filled with sorrow. Those mocking words weren't just words, they were daggers plunged into my self-esteem. Every time my father compared me to my brothers, every time Michael and David ridiculed me, I felt smaller, as if my passion was a sin. But deep down, I knew I couldn't live the life my father wanted. I didn't want to be a carbon copy of Michael or David, sitting in luxurious offices, counting money and signing contracts. I wanted to do something greater, something meaningful to me. When I was 18, I secretly applied to West Point. I worked part-time at a bookstore to cover the application fees, knowing my father would never spend a dime on my foolish dream. The night I received my acceptance letter, I trembled with joy and ran to my father's study to share the news. He was at his desk, reviewing financial reports. I placed the letter in front of him, my heart pounding. "Dad, I got into West Point." He didn't even look up. He picked up the letter, glanced at it, then slowly tore it in half and tossed it into the trash. "A path to failure," he said, his voice icy. "If you choose this, don't expect my recognition." I stood there, stunned, watching the pieces of paper fall to the floor. My mother had passed away a year earlier, and there was no one left to stand by me. Michael and David, overhearing the exchange, just laughed. "Congratulations, little soldier," Michael said. "Go starve." But I didn't give up. I packed my bags, left that opulent house, and entered West Point on a scholarship without a cent from my family. That was the first time I felt freedom, but also the first time I understood that I was completely alone. West Point was a world apart, where cold gray stone walls and the echo of drill commands resounded from early morning. On my first day, I stood in the courtyard, a heavy backpack slung over my shoulders, looking at the other cadets, some confident, some anxious like me. No one knew I was the youngest son of Harold Chandler, and no one cared about the mocking words that had been etched into my heart. Here I was, just Eric Chandler, a cadet who had to prove his worth through sweat and blood. Training at West Point was more grueling than anything I had ever imagined. Early morning runs at 4 a.m. in freezing rain, tactical exams that left my mind spinning, and being screamed at by instructors for the slightest misstep. Some nights I lay in my dorm bed, my body aching, wondering if I had the strength to go on. My father's words, "a path to failure," echoed in my head like a relentless demon. But every time I felt like giving up, I thought of my mother and the letter she wrote before she passed. "Live true to your heart." That letter, now carefully folded in my wallet, was the only flame keeping me upright. I threw myself into studying and training like a man possessed. I studied Napoleon's strategies, analyzed World War II battles, and honed my leadership skills through field exercises. Slowly, I found my place. In my sophomore year, I was selected for the tactical simulation team, where I led a small group to victory in a national competition. When my coach clapped me on the shoulder and said I had the mind of a general, I felt a spark of pride, something my family had never given me. But even those successes came with loneliness. Graduation day at West Point was glorious, with golden sunlight stretching across the Hudson River. I stood in formation, my kepi perfectly aligned, my chest adorned with an honor graduate badge. I looked out at the stands, naively hoping that my father, Michael, or David might show up. I had sent invitations knowing the odds of them coming were near zero. When my name was called, the crowd applauded, but no one from my family was there. I smiled, accepted my diploma, but my heart was heavy. That night, while my friends celebrated with their families, I sat alone in a cafe near the academy, writing a letter to my mother as if she were still alive. "I did it, Mom," I wrote, "but I wish you were here." After West Point, I was deployed to Iraq, where war wasn't the pages of a book, but the smell of gunpowder, the roar of explosions, and the fearful eyes of my comrades. I was a young second lieutenant leading a patrol team in Baghdad. In the early days, I trembled at the sound of gunfire, but I learned to stay calm, putting my team's safety above my own fear. One night, my team was ambushed in a dark alley. Bullets whizzed by and a young soldier was shot in the leg. I dragged him to cover, tied a tourniquet around his wound, and ordered a counterattack. We survived, but that night, sitting in my tent, my hands still shaking, I realized war wasn't glamorous like in books. It was life and death, a responsibility that weighed heavily on my shoulders. In Iraq, I became interested in cybersecurity, a new but increasingly critical field. Terrorist groups were using the internet to communicate, and I saw an opportunity to apply my strategic thinking. I taught myself programming at night after long shifts. When I returned to the US, I was assigned to a special task force focused on cybersecurity. At 30, I led Operation Sentinel Fire, an effort to thwart a massive cyber attack targeting American financial institutions, including my father's Nexora investments. We worked in a stifling room at the Pentagon, eyes glued to screens tracing malware sent from a network in Eastern Europe. After 3 weeks of sleepless nights, we stopped the attack, saving billions of dollars and countless jobs. The Department of Defense awarded me a medal, and a small article in the Wall Street Journal described me as an outstanding officer. I sent that article to my father along with a short note. "I thought you'd want to know." I didn't expect a reply, but still held on to a naive hope. A week later, he called, his voice cold. "Eric, don't waste my time with your soldier games. Being a soldier only leads to poverty." The call ended and I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like the 12-year-old boy abandoned by his father once again. After that, I stopped sending invitations. I didn't invite him to my promotion to major, nor to the ceremony where I received a medal for Operation Ghost Grid, where I protected U.S. electrical infrastructure from another cyber attack. I knew that no matter how formally I invited him, he wouldn't show up. Speaking of Operation Ghost Grid, it was my greatest challenge. My team discovered a sophisticated malware targeting the national power grid. We worked 18-hour days, sifting through millions of lines of code. One night, when the team was on the brink of exhaustion, I spotted a repeating code pattern, a small detail but enough to unravel the entire attack system. We activated countermeasures just before the grid collapsed. Later, at a ceremony in Washington, a 3-star general shook my hand, saying I had changed the game for national security. But when I looked out at the audience, there was still no father, no Michael, no David. I had grown used to it, but the pain lingered. At 40, I was promoted to Major General, one of the youngest generals in the U.S. Army. The ceremony took place in a stately hall in Virginia, with American flags fluttering and trumpets resounding. As the general's insignia was pinned to my shoulders, I felt its weight, not just the rank, but the journey I had traveled. I looked down at Claire sitting in the front row, her eyes sparkling with pride. Claire was the one who changed everything. I met Claire at a charity event for veterans in Virginia when I was a lieutenant colonel. She stood there in a simple green dress, talking to a group of young soldiers about military history. I was captivated by the way she spoke, intelligent, warm, and passionate. We struck up a conversation, and I learned she was a university professor specializing in military strategy. For the first time, I felt someone truly understood me. Claire didn't care about money or fame. She saw me, not the failed son of Harold Chandler, but Eric, the man who fought for what he believed in. We fell in love quickly, but it wasn't easy. I was often deployed far away, and Claire faced long nights of waiting, unsure if I'd return safely. But she was patient, always reminding me that I was enough, that my path mattered. We married at a military base in Virginia, a small ceremony with only a few dozen guests. I sent invitations to my father, Michael, and David, not expecting them to come. As predicted, they didn't show. But Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, arrived with a bouquet of carnations and a tight hug. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, and I had to turn away to hide my tears. Claire became my family, the family I chose, not the one I was born into. She helped me face old wounds, though they haven't fully healed. One night, as I told her about my father and how he called me a failure, Claire took my hand. "You don't need his approval," she said. "You've proven your worth, not to him, but to this entire country." Her words were like medicine, but I still couldn't fully let go. A part of me still yearned, if only once, for my father to look at me with pride. My military career has been a series of challenges, triumphs, and moments of solitude. I've gone from a mocked boy to a major general, but the cost was estrangement from my blood family. When the invitation to my father's retirement party arrived at our apartment in Virginia, it sat on the dining table like a challenge. The card was printed on thick paper with gold-embossed lettering that read, "Harold Chandler, CEO of Nexora Investments, invites Mr. Eric Chandler to a retirement celebration at the Peninsula Hotel, Chicago." No major general preceded my name. Not that I was surprised. My father had never known or cared about what I had become. In his eyes, I was still the lowly soldier from years ago, the one who dared to turn his back on a career at Nexora. Claire sat across from me, twisting her wedding ring, her eyes both gentle and resolute. "You should go, Eric," she said. "Not to prove anything to him, but to close that chapter of your past. You deserve to be free." I shook my head, old wounds resurfacing like a scar brushed too roughly. "Claire, they don't want me there. I'm just a joke to them." But she took my hand, her warm fingers gripping tightly. "You're a major general, Eric. You've saved an entire country. Don't let them drag you down again." Her words pierced the darkness within me like a ray of light. After many sleepless nights, I nodded. "All right. One last time." I flew to Chicago alone, as Claire couldn't join me due to her teaching schedule. As the plane landed on a gloomy afternoon, my stomach churned. The taxi carried me through the Gold Coast streets where childhood memories flooded back like knife wounds. The old family house still stood with its black iron fence and windows glittering with light. I wondered if my father still kept the desk where he tore up my West Point acceptance letter, or if the war books I used to secretly read had been tossed into storage. But I didn't stop by. I went straight to the Peninsula Hotel where the party was being held. I chose a dark blue civilian suit, avoiding my military uniform. I didn't want to show off or make myself a target for their mockery, but I wore a tiny West Point pin on my lapel, a subtle mark of who I was. As I entered the ballroom, my heart pounded as if I were that 18-year-old boy facing my father for the first time. The room was opulent with crystal chandeliers, silk-draped tables, and hundreds of guests in expensive attire. The sound of a violin mingled with refined laughter and the clink of crystal glasses. I stood in a corner holding a glass of water, trying to blend into this alien world. Michael was the first to spot me. Now 45, with graying hair but the same arrogant smirk, he approached with a glass of champagne. "Eric, still living that poor soldier's life?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought you'd quit by now and come crawling back to Dad for a secretary job." David, standing just behind him, chimed in with a sneer. "You don't look half bad, but I bet you still sleep on an iron cot in the barracks." I gave a faint smile, saying nothing. Their jabs were so familiar I was almost immune, but they still stung like small cuts. I nodded and stepped back, hoping to avoid further attention. But my father didn't let me stay invisible for long. He appeared tall and commanding in a bespoke suit, his silver hair perfectly groomed, the rich scent of Creed cologne wafting from him. He moved through the crowd like a king, shaking hands and exchanging smiles with partners and colleagues. When his eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by the familiar contempt. "Eric," he said, his voice low but sharp as a blade, "I didn't think you'd dare show up." I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady. "I came to congratulate you, Dad." He only hummed dismissively, said nothing more, and turned away to continue chatting with a group of businessmen. I stood there, feeling like a ghost out of place in this world. The party began with speeches praising my father, his legacy at Nexora, his sharp business acumen, his two outstanding sons, Michael and David. I sat at a table near the back, among strangers who didn't know who I was. Each accolade for Michael and David about their expansion of Nexora, their multi-million-dollar deals, was a reminder that I didn't exist in my father's world. I gripped my wine glass tightly, keeping my face expressionless, but inside a storm raged. I thought I was strong enough to face this, but the abandonment still suffocated me. Then came the moment I dreaded most. My father took the stage, microphone in hand, the spotlight illuminating his face. The crowd fell silent, waiting. He began his speech, his voice resonant and full of pride. "Nexora Investments is my life's blood," he said, "and I'm proud to have passed this legacy to those who deserve it. Michael and David, the two sons who have brought honor to the Chandler name." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, landing on me. My heart clenched. I knew what was coming, but I couldn't brace for its cruelty. "But then there's Eric," he said, a mocking smile curling his lips. "My youngest son who chose a meaningless path. A lowly soldier wandering somewhere in the military, contributing nothing to this family or its legacy. Perhaps he should leave now and let us continue with those who truly belong here." He pointed toward the door, as if I were an outcast to be banished. The room fell into an awkward silence. Blood drained from my face, my cheeks burning as if slapped. Dozens of eyes turned to me, whispers spreading like a wave. Michael smirked from the head table, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. David bowed his head, but I knew he was hiding a smile. My hands clenched under the table, nails digging into my palms until they bled. Humiliation burned through my chest like wildfire, and part of me wanted to stand, run, and leave it all behind. But my feet felt nailed to the floor. I rose slowly, back straight, preparing to walk out as my father wished. Then a deep, authoritative voice rang out from behind. "You're Major General Chandler, aren't you?" I turned, my heart racing. Robert Grayson, the chairman of Nexora Investments, a tall man with silver hair and piercing eyes, was staring at me intently. The room seemed to hold its breath. Grayson stepped forward, his gaze locked on the West Point pin on my lapel. "You're Eric Chandler, who led Operation Sentinel Fire, aren't you?" he said, his voice carrying across the room. "The one who saved Nexora from a cyber attack that could have destroyed us?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "Yes, sir." That was me. The room erupted in stunned silence. My father stood on the stage, his face pale, mouth agape as if struck by lightning. He truly didn't know I had become a major general or what I had done for his own company. Michael and David stared at me, their eyes a mix of confusion and irritation. Grayson placed a hand on my shoulder, his smile warm yet commanding. "Not many know," he said, turning to the crowd, "but Major General Chandler is a strategic genius. He stopped an attack that could have cost Nexora billions. He's not just a soldier. He's a pride of this nation." Murmurs of awe rippled through the room. I felt the weight of every gaze, but this time they weren't pinpricks of judgment. They were admiration, curiosity, and a hint of shame from those who had laughed along with my father. I looked at him, but he couldn't meet my eyes. He stood there, gripping the microphone, his gaze empty like a man who had lost something he couldn't name. Grayson turned to me. "Would you like to say anything, Major General?" he asked. I shook my head, offering a faint smile. "No, sir. I just came to congratulate my father." But Grayson didn't let it end there. He pulled me onto the stage, despite my protests. "A man like you deserves recognition," he said, then looked directly at my father. "Harold, you have a son to be proud of." The ballroom fell silent, the crystal chandeliers casting light that made me feel as if I were standing under a stage spotlight. My father, Harold Chandler, CEO of Nexora Investments, stood there clutching the microphone, his face pale, his eyes lost. He didn't know I was a major general. None of my family did. The years I spent fighting, from the dust-choked alleys of Baghdad to the stifling rooms of the Pentagon, had never been acknowledged by them. And now, in this moment, with hundreds of eyes fixed on me, I felt a strange weight. Not the humiliation from before, but an opportunity to voice what I had kept buried for so long. Grayson placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice deep and warm. "Say something, Eric," he urged. "They need to hear from you." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I wasn't prepared for this. I had come only to congratulate my father, to seek a glimmer of reconciliation, but now I stood on the stage facing my father, Michael, David, and a room full of people who had once mocked me. I glanced at the West Point pin on my lapel, and a flood of memories rushed back. The sleepless nights in Iraq, the letters I wrote to my mother as if she were still alive, Claire's words, "You don't need their approval." I gripped the microphone, my hand trembling slightly. I'm not good at talking about myself," I began, my voice faltering. The room remained silent, waiting. "I came here to congratulate my father, Harold Chandler, for what he's built with Nexora. I know he's proud of Michael and David, and they deserve that." I paused, looking directly at my father. He still wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he couldn't bear the reality of me standing here being recognized. "But I want to say one thing," I continued, my voice growing steadier. "I didn't choose my path to disappoint my father or to defy this family. I chose it because it's what I believed in. I believe in protecting what matters, not just money or reputation, but the people who depend on us, the values bigger than us. I've spent 20 years in the military, not to be a lowly soldier, but to be a soldier, a leader, and I'm proud of that." I paused, feeling my breath steady. The room was still quiet, but the eyes on me had shifted, from curiosity to admiration, from skepticism to reflection. I looked at my father, hoping for a sign, a nod, an acknowledging glance. But he just stood there, lips pressed tight, hands gripping the microphone as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Michael and David, seated at the head table, looked at me with unreadable expressions, no longer mocking but devoid of warmth. "I'm not here to prove anything," I said, my voice low but clear. "I just want to say that everyone has their own path, and if mine doesn't fit with this family, I'll keep walking it because I know I've done right." I turned to Grayson, nodding in gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson, for reminding me of that." The crowd began to clap, scattered at first, then swelling into a loud ovation. My cheeks warmed, not from shame, but from a sense of release. I had finally said what I'd held inside for years, not to hurt my father, but to free myself. I stepped off the stage, Grayson patting my shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. "You're a good man, Eric," he said. "Nexora owes you more than Harold will ever admit." I didn't look at my father again. I didn't need to. I walked out of the room past admiring glances and hurried handshakes from strangers. The cold Chicago wind greeted me outside the Peninsula Hotel, but this time, it didn't make me shiver. I felt lighter, as if I'd shed a burden that had pressed on my chest for 2 decades. The next day, my phone buzzed. It was my father. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen, unsure if I wanted to answer. Finally, I picked up. "Eric," his voice was dry, devoid of the usual sarcasm, but also lacking warmth. "Why didn't you say anything about Major General?" He stumbled over the title as if it were hard to say. "You meant to humiliate me, didn't you? What kind of trick was that?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. "I didn't trick you, Dad. I just lived my life. You never asked, so I never told you." He fell silent, and I heard a sigh over the line. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice tinged with something like anger. You could come back to Nexera, work with Michael and David. I'll arrange it. I almost laughed, not out of amusement, but at the absurdity of the offer. I don't need Nexera, Dad, I replied. I have my own path. I hung up, not waiting for his response. A few days later, David texted me a short message. You got too full of yourself, Major General. Don't think you're better than anyone. But Michael surprisingly called. Eric, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I was wrong to look down on you. I didn't know what you'd done. I think I was jealous because you didn't live to please Dad. His admission stunned me. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, thanks, Michael. Maybe we'll talk someday. It was the first time I felt a spark of hope for my brother. Back in Virginia, I threw myself into work with renewed energy. The moment I stood on that stage at my father's retirement party, facing his stunned expression and the unexpected recognition from Grayson, had shifted something within me. It wasn't that I needed their approval, but I realized I had risen above the mockery and the expectations my family had imposed on me. I was no longer the trembling boy cowering under my father's contempt. I was Major General Eric Chandler, and I was proud of the path I had chosen. At the base, I led a new cybersecurity project, focused on protecting national infrastructure from increasingly sophisticated threats. I worked with a team of young, passionate, but inexperienced officers. I spent hours training them, sharing lessons from Operation Sentinel Fire and Ghost Grid. The work became my sanctuary, a place where I found purpose. I also started hosting workshops for young service members, speaking about strategy and resilience. Once a colonel pulled me aside after a presentation and clapped me on the shoulder. Eric, you're a role model for this generation, he said. You show them you don't need a prestigious family or wealth to achieve greatness. His words touched me more deeply than any medal I'd ever received. From then on, I began writing a memoir, not to boast, but to heal. Each page was a step toward letting go of old wounds and preparing for brighter journeys ahead. I wrote about West Point, about nights in Iraq when I thought I wouldn't survive, about Claire and how she helped me rediscover myself. When I sent the first draft to Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, she read it and broke down in tears. Your mother would be so proud, she said. Later, she sent me an old photo of my mother standing by a bookshelf with a military history book in hand. Your passion is her legacy, Eric. I held the photo close, feeling my mother nearer than ever. About a year after my father's retirement party, I received an unexpected call from Michael's number. I hesitated but decided to answer. Eric, he said, his voice tentative, far from his usual confidence. Can we meet and talk? Surprised, I agreed immediately. We arranged to meet at a small downtown cafe with wooden walls and the rich aroma of roasted coffee. When I walked in, Michael was already there, dressed in a simple shirt instead of his usual expensive suit. He looked tired, but there was a lightness in his eyes. Eric, he began, fidgeting with his coffee cup. I quit Nexera. I blinked, unable to believe my ears. Michael, my father's right-hand man, the one who lived to expand Nexera's empire, had walked away. I'm exhausted, he continued, his voice low. Exhausted from living to please Dad, from chasing numbers and contracts. I've been hiding something. I always wanted to be a chef. I love cooking, but Dad called it women's work. So for decades, I lived to make him happy. Now I've decided to live for myself like you've done for years. I sat there, stunned. Michael, who once mocked me for my military passion, was now confessing his own buried dream. I enrolled in a culinary course in Paris, he said, his eyes lighting up. I don't know if I'll succeed or fail, but for the first time I feel free. And I learned that from you, Eric. You never bowed to Dad. His words left me choked up. I had always seen Michael as my father's perfect mold, but it turned out he too had been trapped by those toxic expectations. We sat there for hours, sharing stories we'd never told each other. Michael spoke of sleepless nights trying to please our father, the pressure to outshine David, and the emptiness he felt despite having everything. I shared my days at West Point, the times I wanted to give up but was held back by my mother's letters. For the first time, I saw Michael not as an adversary but as a brother, someone also trying to heal. Then Michael brought up our father. "Dad's not the same, Eric," he said, his voice lowering. "Since retiring, he's empty. He lives in that big house, but he's alone. David's busy with work and I've left. He's got high blood pressure and diabetes, the toll of years neglecting his health. He won't say it, but I know he's lonely." I stayed silent, picturing my father, the man who once seemed an unassailable mountain, now frail and alone. Part of me was still angry, but a smaller part felt a pang of pity. I looked at Michael. "What if we do something for him?" I asked. He looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" I smiled, an idea sparking. "Dad's birthday is coming up. What if we throw him a surprise party, not to please him, but to show him we're still a family, even if it's not as warm as when Mom was alive?" Michael hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But just you and me. David won't join." We started planning. I reached out to Aunt Susan, who was immediately enthusiastic. "Wonderful idea, Eric," she said over the phone. "Harold needs to know he still has family." We chose a small Chicago restaurant our mother used to love, with a cozy ambiance and black and white photos on the walls. Michael took charge of the menu, personally cooking dishes he knew our father liked: beef Wellington and homemade apple pie. I invited a few of our father's old friends from Nexera, including Grayson, who agreed as soon as he heard the plan. "Harold needs a wake-up call," he said, chuckling. On our father's birthday, Michael and I stood in the restaurant, nervous as children. Michael had convinced him to come under the pretense of a quiet dinner with old friends. When he walked in, I saw he was thinner, his silver hair whiter, his eyes weary. But when he saw us, saw the table decorated with old family photos, including ones of Mom, he froze. What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Happy birthday, Dad," Michael said, stepping forward to place a hand on his shoulder. "We wanted you to know we're still here." Our father looked at us, then around the room, at Aunt Susan, Grayson, his old friends, and me, the son he'd once banished from his party. He didn't speak, just nodded, but I saw his eyes glisten. It was the first time I'd seen him close to tears. The party was simple but warm. Grayson shared old Nexera stories. Aunt Susan recounted memories of Mom, and Michael made everyone laugh with behind-the-scenes tales of his cooking. I sat there watching my father and realized he was no longer the fearsome figure of my childhood. He was just an old man, learning to face his loneliness. As the party ended, he pulled Michael and me aside. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. I was wrong about a lot of things. It wasn't a direct apology, but for my father, it was the closest he'd ever come. After the party, Michael and I stayed in touch regularly. He moved to Paris, beginning his journey as a chef, and sent me photos of dishes he created. My father started calling me, not often, but enough to show he was trying. He talked about his doctor visits, how he'd started reading history books. "Because your mother liked them," he said. I didn't fully forgive him, but I learned to accept that he was human, with his own mistakes and pain. In the spring of 2025, I stood in a small room at the Colorado Springs base, checking my uniform in the mirror. The Major General insignia gleamed on my shoulder, but today it held a special weight. I was about to receive an award from the Department of Defense, the Distinguished Service Medal, for my contributions to developing an advanced cybersecurity system safeguarding national infrastructure from global threats. It wasn't my first medal, but it was the first time I felt a peculiar anticipation, not just for the award, but for something else. My father, Harold Chandler, had promised to attend. After the surprise birthday party Michael and I had thrown for him, our relationship began to shift, slowly but noticeably. My father called more often, no longer laced with sarcasm or criticism. He asked about my work, about Claire, about James, his grandson he'd never met. Once he even mentioned reading a book on World War II and asked me about the Normandy invasion. "Your mother loved this stuff," he said, his voice low, tinged with regret. I wasn't sure if he had truly changed or was just trying to make amends, but I learned to embrace these small moments, keeping my expectations modest while leaving my heart open. When I sent the invitation to the award ceremony, I didn't expect him to come. I'd sent dozens of invitations in the past. For my West Point graduation, my post-Iraq medal ceremony, my promotion to major, and no one from my family had ever shown up. But this time, my father responded over the phone, his voice hesitant but firm. Eric, I'll be there. I want to see you. I stood frozen, phone in hand, unsure how to reply. Claire, holding James in her arms, smiled at me. See, Eric, things are changing. I nodded, but inside I was anxious, as if afraid this was a dream that might vanish. The day of the ceremony arrived, a crisp morning in Washington, D.C., with a clear blue sky and cool air. The Pentagon's auditorium was decorated solemnly, American flags flanking the stage, rows of seats filled with officers, officials, and families. Claire sat in the front row, James on her lap, the boy dressed in a tiny suit, his big eyes scanning the room. Aunt Susan sat beside her, beaming as always. Michael, fresh from his culinary course in Paris, sat next to Claire, his eyes brimming with pride. But I didn't dare linger on the audience too long, fearing disappointment if my father didn't show. The ceremony began with the national anthem, and I stood tall, hand over my heart, feeling my pulse. A 3-star general took the stage, delivering a speech on the importance of cybersecurity in the modern era. He mentioned my project, a real-time malware detection and neutralization system deployed nationwide. Major General Eric Chandler, he said, his voice resounding, has not only protected our nation but inspired a new generation of officers. The crowd applauded, and I felt my cheeks flush, unaccustomed to the attention. When my name was called, I walked to the stage, my dress shoes echoing on the marble floor. I glanced at the audience, and then I saw him, my father, Harold Chandler, seated in the 3rd row, wearing his familiar navy suit. He looked older, his silver hair whiter, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his gaze wasn't cold or contemptuous. Instead, I saw something new, attention, and perhaps a hint of pride. My heart raced, not for the award, but for this moment, one I'd waited 40 years to experience. The 3-star general pinned the medal to my chest and shook my hand firmly. Thank you, Eric, he said. This country owes you. I nodded, thanking him, but my eyes drifted to my father. He clapped, slowly but steadily, and when our gazes met, he gave a slight nod as if to say he saw me, truly saw me. After receiving the medal, I was invited to speak. I stood at the microphone, the stage lights slightly blinding. The auditorium fell silent, waiting. I took a deep breath, recalling the moment at my father's retirement party when I stood on a stage and spoke my truth. This time I felt no anger or need to prove myself. I just wanted to share. Thank you to the Department of Defense and my team, I began, my voice steady and clear. Today isn't just about an award, it's about a journey. I grew up in a family where success was measured by wealth and status. I was called a lowly soldier, told my path was meaningless. But I learned that true value lies not in what others think of you, but in what you believe in and the people you protect. I paused, looking at Claire, Aunt Susan, and my father. I stand here today not because I sought recognition, but because I want to inspire. If you have a dream, even if the world turns its back, chase it. Believe in yourself even when no one else does, and remember that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people you choose, the ones who stand by you when you need them most. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the hall. I looked at my father, and this time he stood, clapping with the others. I saw his eyes glisten, and my heart swelled in that moment. When the ceremony ended, my father approached me. He stood before me, hands in his pockets, his gaze uncertain. Eric, he said, his voice hoarse, I'm proud of you. I was wrong not to see it sooner. I was stunned, never expecting those words from the man who'd torn up my West Point letter, who'd banished me from his party. Tears welled in my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you, Dad, I said. I'm glad you're here." He nodded, then unexpectedly pulled me into an awkward hug. It was the first time he'd embraced me since I was a child, and I felt the frailty in his arms. "I was wrong about so much," he whispered. "But you're what I'm most proud of." I said nothing, just gripped his shoulder tightly. In that moment, I felt a healing I didn't know I needed. After the ceremony, my father and I began rebuilding our relationship, one small step at a time. He visited us, played with James, his grandson, and shared stories about my mother. He admitted he'd lived a life too focused on money, neglecting what truly mattered. "I lost your mother because I wasn't there," he said once, his voice heavy with regret. "I don't want to lose you too." I nodded, making no promises, but in my heart, I knew I was ready to give him a chance. Michael continued his journey in Paris, opening a small restaurant and sending me photos of dishes he was proud of. David kept his distance, but I didn't push. I'd learned you can't change everyone, and I was at peace with that. Claire and I continued building our life, with James at the center of our world. I finished my memoir, publishing it under the title A Warrior's Path, and received letters from young service members saying my story inspired them. Reflecting on my journey from the mocked boy in a grand Chicago home to the major general standing on a stage receiving a medal, I realized every challenge, every wound, was worth it. I'd learned to rise above scorn, to find true family in Claire, James, Michael, Aunt Susan, and my comrades. Most importantly, I learned to forgive, not just my father, but myself, for once craving validation from those who couldn't see my worth. If you're reading this story, I want to leave you with a message. Don't let anyone define your value. Pursue your passion, no matter how lonely or difficult the path. Find the people who see you clearly, who love you for who you are, and learn to forgive, not to erase the past, but to free your future. Life is a battlefield, but the greatest victory is living true to your heart.